Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the complete Charlotte guide. Charlotte is the newest 4-star healer that was released in version 4.2 alongside Furina and Baiju's banners. In this video, we're going to cover everything you need to know about Charlotte, talking about what she does, how to play her, and how to best build her, covering her best weapons, artifacts, and teams. Before we begin, I want you guys to know that I do stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. And with that being said, I want to get right into the video. Alright, so starting things off, what does Charlotte actually do and how do you play her? Well, her abilities are pretty straightforward. She has a camera and likes to take pictures, and so you'll see that even your normal attacks and charge attacks are pretty unique because you're just using your camera. The main thing you need to know about your normal attack, even though Charlotte is primarily a support and a healer character, is that as a cryo catalyst, all of her attacks will deal cryo damage, meaning that if you ever need more cryo in your team, you can always use her normal attacks and spend a bit of time on field on her. It's also worth noting that Charlotte's normal attacks have a pretty decent amount of AoE and a pretty long range, which can make her feel like a nicer on-field option. Also, something I wanted to mention is for your charge attacks, you can cancel it super early. Like, that's the whole animation, but if I do it here and then just dash, it'll still go, right? So if you plan on using your Charlotte from on-field and want a charge attack, know that you can cancel it really early by dashing or jumping. Also worth noting that her charge attack does have a Numa aligned hit, which can help against certain Fontaine enemies. More importantly though, her elemental skill and burst are going to be the core parts of her kit. Her elemental skill is somewhat similar to Nahida's in the sense that you can tap or hold it, and when you do, it'll mark enemies. When you tap it, it'll mark up to 5 opponents near you, doing a quick snapshot in front of you and marking the enemies that you hit. The enemies that are marked will then take cryo damage at fixed intervals, being hit once every 1.5 seconds, with the mark lasting for 6 seconds. This means that it'll trigger 4 different times, with each hit having a pretty okay scaling. With that in mind, you can also hold your ability where you'll enter a finisher frame state, you'll take more of an actual picture, and you can freely move as you're doing this. Now, where this ability will greatly differ to, for example, Nahida's mark, is not only can you move during it, which is nice, but also the way it marks enemies is a lot worse. You actually have to take a long time to mark the enemies. It'll take over a second of just charging up to go from the first form of the mark, as you can see, to the second one, with the second one applying its different and unique sort of upgraded mark, which is way better than the basic tap one. In fact, if you let go of the hold too early, it'll just apply the same mark as when you tap your skill, whereas if you hold it and wait until your mark sort of upgrades, as you can see by a visual cue, you will enter the finisher frame state and apply a bigger mark onto enemies, which deals more damage, lasts longer, and more importantly, will generate more particles. In fact, while the cooldown is longer, you'll go from a 12-second cooldown to an 18-second cooldown on your skill. Typically, you're only going to be using 1 skill per rotation, especially if your rotation's around 20 seconds, which lines up with Furina's cooldowns, and you will generate 5 cryo particles instead of 3. This is really important as Charlotte's burst is a core part of her kit, and she is a very energy hungry character, as we'll see in the coming sections. And so being able to hold your skill to get more energy and mark the enemies for longer is pretty important. The mark actually lasting for twice as long, 12 seconds instead of 6, hitting enemies up to 8 times instead of 4, is actually very relevant because not only will you deal more cryo damage, apply more cryo and allowing you to proc more reactions, but also have better uptime on artifact sets like, for example, Tenacity the Millith, which we'll talk about later and can be good at buffing your team's overall damage. Because of this, holding your skill is typically recommended, but there can be uses to pressing it as well, but just know that there are multiple ways of using this ability. Another thing I wanted to mention regarding your hold that is very different to Nahida's is that you'll only mark the enemy that is within your camera lens when you let go of it. With Nahida, for example, you can do a sort of 360 spin marking all the enemies around you, whereas if you do that with Charlotte, you'll only get the enemy that's in front of you or the enemies that are in front of you as you stop holding your E and release the ability. Now, where her kit really gets interesting and the best part is your elemental burst, right? The main reason you're holding your skill, generally speaking, is to get more energy, to be able to use your burst, which restores a surprising amount of HP. Genuinely, your burst is a really good form of healing, as it will start by dealing AoE crowd damage when you use it, and then restore all of your party members' HP based on your attack. This will heal your active character, but also everyone else in your party, and then after, while the ability is active, lasting for 4 seconds, it will continuously regenerate your on-field party member for a bit more HP. This amount of burst healing is actually really good. For a 4-star, it's very surprisingly strong, and while in a lot of teams, how much you heal isn't the end-all be-all for a healer, with Furina, who is the newest 5-star, the Hydra Archon that Charlotte is released alongside of, having a good amount of healing is actually really important. Furina drains all of your character's HP to convert it into more damage through her burst and also her skill, making it to where you actually want to have a healer that can heal all of your party members at the same time, and that can do a lot of healing. And Charlotte can actually do just that. While her damage isn't particularly amazing, and she does need a lot of energy to make her burst work, if you can do that, can get your energy, and can use your burst on cooldown, the amount of healing you gain is actually really good, and it is to all of your party members. Right now, I'm going to be using a burst on my Charlotte with my level 80 Favonius Codex, which should be level 90. I just don't have the weapon mats. And even despite that, even despite using a weapon that doesn't give me attack and isn't even fully leveled, with a talent level 8 Charlotte, I am still essentially fully healing my party just by using my burst every 20 seconds. Keep in mind that usually with Furina, your characters are only going to be around 50% HP when you're healing, healing because you don't really want to go under that, then Charlotte should really easily be able to heal that back up. For normal like attack scaling characters like my Diluc here, for example, I can full heal him from no HP, whereas with someone like Furina who scales on max HP, if she's really low, I might not be able to fully heal her in one burst press, but obviously with higher investment you might be able to. With your first constellation, which I'll touch on shortly, you also will gain a lot of healing, but even without that, you can easily heal your characters at least the 50% HP that they'll be down, and usually be able to full heal your entire party. This big amount of burst healing, which obviously can be way higher if you optimize your Charlotte, is something that makes her really nice and a good healer slot for Furina teams. She's nothing game breaking. A lot of teams would prefer a healer that'll also buff you with more damage, but having this big amount of healing that can even be ran at low investment while also having good supportive weapons and artifact sets that she can make use of and applying a bit of cryo can make her definitely a strong healer option when you need a lot of healing, like with Furina or in some cryo teams as well. Do keep in mind though that her burst has a 20-second cooldown with an 80 energy cost, and this 80 energy cost is a big cost. It's the main reason why you want to be holding your skill to get more energy, actually getting as many cryo particles as you can, and also running a lot of energy recharge on her, as we'll cover in the build section shortly. The damage of this ability and even her skill is nothing too amazing. Like, you can kind of optimize it because you're scaling on attack anyways, but it's really not the most, and you're primarily using her for the big amount of healing that she gives all of your party members. In fact, I did want to mention her C1 as well. Charlotte's healing is genuinely pretty good at C0 as a party-wide basically full heal. Your C1 can definitely help a lot, just give you way more healing even if your investment isn't as high. In fact, what it'll do is as soon as you heal a character with your burst, you will mark them with verification, and then afterwards you will heal them once every 2 seconds for 6 seconds, which means 3 times, for 80% of Charlotte's attack. This is a lot of bonus healing. Genuinely, it's a good amount of just passive extra healing if your burst wasn't enough. While for a lot of characters you may already have enough healing, for HP scaling ones like my Furina, who right now at my current medium to high-ish levels of investment, I am fully healing at 50% HP, but not fully healing from like 1 HP. This C1 would definitely help give me a bonus amount of healing, allowing you to top up some characters that you might otherwise not be able to. It's really a big amount and definitely a good first constellation that can just make healing a lot easier for you. Moving on, for Charlotte's passive talents, first of all, you'll get a pretty big cooldown decrease on your elemental skill if you hold it and apply the focused impression as you're defeating opponents. So in multi-wave content or against a lot of mobs, you'll be able to reduce the cooldown of your skill by 2 seconds every time you defeat an opponent, triggering up to 4 times every 12 seconds. Moving on, for Charlotte's second passive talent, she will gain either healing bonus or cryo damage bonus based on however other party members you have that are either Fontenians or non-Fontenians. If you have characters from Fontaine, you'll gain healing bonus, which is more relevant for her healing, obviously, especially with Furina, who's from Fontaine. And if you have non-Fontenians, then you'll gain cryo damage bonus instead. This makes it probably the first racist passive we have, which is quite concerning. With that in mind, for your talent priority, typically maximize your burst if you want more healing, and if you care about your damage, like your personal damage, you can focus on your skill instead, leveling your normal attacks if you're on field, ignoring them completely if you're just an off-field healer, depending on how you choose to play her. Typically though, focus on your burst to maximize how much healing you're getting. With that in mind, I believe Charlotte's actually pretty nice as a healer, especially if you have her first constellation, and even just in general when you understand the fact that she's also alongside Furina's banner, who's a character that really wants a good healer in your team, as she'll constantly be draining all of your party members' HP. The burst heal that Charlotte will give you on her elemental burst to all of your party members at the same time is honestly pretty impressive for a 4-star character. Not only, as I said, does it get better with constellations, but I think that paired with the fact that she can also give your team some buffs, not the most, but through supportive artifact sets and weapons, paired with good healing and also having the potential to be ran on field if you want to, for example, fire your Xingqiu's rain swords, your Beto's lightning, or your Yelan's coordinated attacks. Because of this, when built correctly, I really do think she's a pretty decent 4-star healer, surprisingly strong, especially with Furina, and Charlotte is a character who's a 4-star, accessible, and on Furina's banner, and I'm actually surprised and happy with her healing. Outside of Furina teams, she's less meta, but still can give you a lot of healing, and for people that want to play her as an on-field driver / auto attacker, you definitely can as well, as she'll apply a decent amount of cryo from on-field and be useful in that regard. Keep in mind, it doesn't really change how you want to build her too much. I don't recommend going full DPS, as most of the teams where you're picking her, you want the healing as well. So we're primarily going to be focusing on how to build her to optimize her healing and utility and value, but keep in mind that you can build her a bit more damage if you want, and I'll go over it briefly when we talk about artifacts and weapons as well. All right, now with that out of the way, how do you want to build Charlotte? Well, generally as a supportive character, there's a few sets that you can go. First of all, the Tenacity of the Millith 4-piece or the Noblesse Oblige 4-piece are going to be the two generalistic support options that Charlotte can use. Noblesse Oblige will give your entire team 20% attack when you burst, lasting for 12 seconds. Tenacity of Millith, on the other hand, will give you 20% attack as well. However, this effect will last for 3 seconds, but triggering every time your skill will deal damage, up to once every 0.5 seconds, and this can proc even when you're off field. Because of this, your Charlotte can actually have pretty decent uptime on the Millith set, and it is quite a bit harder for most characters to proc the Millith Lilith 4-piece than it is for Noblesse Oblige, so it is, in my opinion, a nicer thing to be able to run Lilith, as not every support can. Because of this, since you're typically going to be holding your skill on Charlotte and then swapping, running the Tenacity of the Lilith set is going to be one of your go-to options, what I recommend to just give your team some attack. With that in mind, there are definitely some teams where the attack buff isn't going to be that relevant. There's a lot of HP scaling characters, like Furina, for example, who can't make use of the Lilith set, or even the Noblesse Oblige 4-piece for that matter, and in those situations, there are some other options you can go as well. You can mix and match 2-piece sets, just go based on substats, and try to get stats like attack percent, energy recharge, or even healing bonus to give your Charlotte more stats. Alternatively, you can also go for a healing 4-piece, like basically any healer set. Right now we have Ocean Hued Clam and Maiden's Beloved. Ocean Hued Clam being particularly nice if you want a bit more damage and you're healing enough, which typically with your burst you can, or even a 4-star set like Instructor if you're running a reaction-based team and want to buff your team with Elemental Mastery. Keep in mind that since it's a 4-star set though, you won't be getting as many stats on your Charlotte, so your healing will be a bit lower. Overall though, I think as a supportive healer, she can be ran at very low investment and on pretty much any set, including just 2-pieces, if you have good substats on them, meaning that she's very easy to build and farm for. You can use whatever you already have, provided the 2-piece sets make sense for her, or go for a supportive set like Noblesse Oblige or Tenacity of the Lilith, which I especially recommend if your team needs the attack buff, which most teams could use, even if it's just for 1 or 2 characters. Lastly, if you want to give your Charlotte more damage for some reason, you can. You can go Golden Troop to maximize your skill damage, Blizzard Strayer in a freeze team, or even like Gilded Dreams if you're melting, or Maréchaussée if you're on field. Generally though, these are all fine options, honestly, because as I said, some teams just having substats is all you need, but typically I do recommend going for a supportive set, as it will typically make more sense when you play her in a healing role, because you want to buff your team and heal them as much as you can. Alright, now with that out of the way, let's talk about what stats you want on Charlotte. Keep in mind that in a lot of situations, this is actually going to be more important than your set, because you actually need a ton of energy recharge to be able to spam your burst on cooldown. In fact, while there's a few stats you're looking for, the first thing you should get is enough energy recharge to be able to use your burst. While there are many factors that change how much ER you need, like if you run her on field or with another crowd character, a high energy team like running her with characters that have Favonius weapons, in general, she will still need a lot of energy recharge. How much you need is going to range from around 180 to 250, depending on your team and rotation. Again, this is like a pretty large range. There's a constellation, your C4, that can reduce how much ER you need, and there are some weapons that can help a lot with this that we'll talk about in the next section, and that can help alleviate your need for ER, but in general, you need a lot, and your burst is going to be crucial to make sure you're healing enough, especially in a Furina team, which is a big chunk of Charlotte teams. Because of this, you need to prioritize energy recharge until you can make sure you burst as often as you need to, which with Furina means every rotation. As mentioned in the talent section, this is also partially why you're holding your skill, to just get more particles, because if not, how much ER you need can be absurd. Generally though, it is manageable. Just make sure you have enough, and then after that, you can also look for stats that'll maximize your healing, like attack percent on any subset that you can get, and also healing bonus as a potential option on your circlet. Because of this, the subsets you're looking for are energy recharge and attack percent, and crit rate is also great if you're running a Favonius Codex to proc its effect more often, but more on that in the next section. With that in mind, for the main stats you're looking for, as I said, you can go for healing bonus on your circlet as the best option to increase your healing. Attack percent is a viable option as well if you don't have a good healing bonus one, or don't need all the healing and want a bit of damage as well. For your goblet, attack percent is typically what's recommended, and for your sands, either attack percent or energy recharge, depending on what you need more of, will be the best option. Again, since you need a lot of ER, energy recharge sands is typically recommended, but if you have enough through your weapon or are running a high energy generating team, for example pairing her with other crowd characters, then an attack sands becomes more viable. If you want to maximize her personal damage, you can consider things like a cryo goblet and a crit circlet, but again, that's not typically how I recommend playing or building Charlotte. It's more of a for fun thing. Moving on, for Charlotte's weapons, it's pretty straightforward. As a character who wants energy recharge to use her burst as often as possible, and attack percent, as that's the stat that she uses to heal, those are the two things you're going to be looking for on your weapons. Because of this, I personally recommend going for a weapon that can help alleviate her energy recharge needs, like either a Favonius Codex or an Oathsworn Eye. Oathsworn Eye is an old event weapon that you may have and that you could refine for free throughout the event, which is a weapon that gives you a lot of attack with a high base attack and then attack as the substat, while also giving you 48% energy recharge at R5 for 10 seconds after you use your skill. This is therefore a lot of really good stats for Charlotte, so if you have this event weapon, definitely feel free to use it for attack and energy recharge. Favonius Codex is also a great option, sometimes better depending on how much energy recharge you need, as a catalyst that is especially good if you and your entire team needs a lot of energy, because it gives you a ton of ER and then an effect that will generate energy for you and your entire team when you do crit, meaning that you'll need to build a bit of crit rate on your Charlotte to really proc its effect. This weapon also gets better with refinement and is just a really good supportive catalyst overall. Because of that, those are the two most general options I can recommend. However, there's other really good supportive options as well. Prototype Amber is very viable. Despite the HP stat being useless on her, the effect, especially especially with refinement, is very useful to give energy and also a bit more healing. Additionally, a weapon I wanted to mention is obviously Thrilling Tales. Again, the HP stat and just the stats you're gaining here for your Charlotte aren't really good for her healing, but if you already have enough healing, which can be the case a lot of the time, especially without Furina, or if you're building her very well and invested a lot into her, then while yes, this weapon having lower stats won't give you as much healing, as long as you have enough healing, Thrilling Tales will be really good because it can buff one of your characters by giving them 48% attack for 10 seconds once every 20 seconds. This is really good, having pretty decent uptime in your standard like 20-second rotation, and being a particularly nice option when paired with a hyper carry who can really use this attack buff. Keep in mind that a character like Furina doesn't scale with attack, so in a few teams this weapon can be more useless, less relevant, whereas it can be a really good option as a standard supportive weapon if you really don't need the stats that the other catalysts will give you. Personally though, I do recommend running a energy recharge weapon, generally speaking, like Oathsworn Eye or Favonius Codex, to help get your burst back as often as possible and make her easier to build. Alternatively, if you're playing her on field and want damage, then any of the offensive catalysts are viable, but again, even in teams like that, she is primarily played as a healer, and so you still want energy recharge, so I generally recommend the same weapons regardless, with Favonius Codex being even better if you're on field, as its effect will proc more often. Moving on for Charlotte's Constellations, as I said earlier in the video, her C1 is the main important one, but this is the only one I covered, the one I touched on, and it's a really nice first, like, early constellation you might get while pulling on the current banners. Maybe as you pull for Furina, you might have gotten 2 Charlottes, and this one will just give you a nice bonus amount of healing that really can add up. Moving on for your second constellation, Charlotte will just gain more attack based on how many opponents she hits with her skill. If you hold your skill and hit 3 opponents, you'll gain up to 30% attack, which means more healing and a bit more damage for your Charlotte herself. Moving on for your third and fifth constellation, as always, they increase your talent levels, with your third one increasing your burst talent level, again, translates to more healing. For your fourth constellation, you will get more energy. In fact, when enemies are marked by your skill and you use your burst, it will deal 10% more damage and restore 2 energy for Charlotte, with this energy restore being able to be triggered up to 5 times every 20 seconds, which is your burst cooldown, meaning you will get anywhere from 2 to 10 more energy, which is quite a bit. Genuinely, your burst costs 80 energy. If you gain 10 energy, then you'll only need 70 more, which will save you a pretty decent amount of energy on your build. It's not the most ER, but it is a nice amount that can make her easier to build and allow you to get your burst back easier. Lastly, for your sixth constellation, this ability will make Monsieur Vérité, which is your camera that you get when you use your burst, attack alongside your active character after using your burst, with his attacks proccing up to once every 6 seconds. When you do this, he will deal an additional amount of AoE crowd damage and also heal your active character, once again scaling with Charlotte's attack. This means a bit more cryo damage, cryo application, and also some more healing. Overall, Charlotte's constellations are pretty decent, genuinely, with her C1 being a big increase in healing. A very nice C1 if you can get it, although generally through my testing, she can still heal enough without it. This just helps quite a bit. Moving on for the teams you want to run Charlotte in, while this typically is a really important section of every guide video, for a healer like Charlotte, it's pretty straightforward. You can use her in any team that needs a lot of healing, and that can also use the cryo that she gives you. Keep in mind that she does need a bit of field time to actually charge up her skill, and will need a lot of energy, but if you can fulfill those needs, then Charlotte can be a good healer for you. I want to say, as I mentioned many times throughout the video, that I think she particularly synergizes well in Furina teams, where the big amount of healing she gives you actually makes a lot of sense. Teams where running someone like Bennett, who is widely regarded to be one of the most broken characters, won't even be as needed, as with Furina, not only does she not scale on attack, but she also really wants healing to all of your party, whereas someone like Bennett will only heal one of your party members at a time. Because of this, in Furina teams, her exceptional healing, even though she doesn't have too many buffs to your team other than her artifact set and weapon, she's an excellent choice. So as I said, I recommend her in pretty much any Furina team if you need a cryo slot, so cryo reactions, or just a flexible healer. This includes many different teams. You can use her as the last slot in a vape team. If you don't have or don't want to use someone like Jean, having a bit of extra melts and freezes can be fine. The same can be said in Dendro related reactions, or as a flexible slot in even an Anemo team, pretty much using her wherever you can fit her. In a freeze team in particular, I do like having a cryo healer there, and Charlotte can be a really good option with Furina. A character like Diona or even Layla are typically enough defensive utility for most freeze teams, or sometimes you won't really need a healer in a freeze team, or you can use a hydro healer like Kokomi. But with Furina as an offensive hydro option, having that team-wide healing with Charlotte makes her a great slot for a freeze team. Even without Furina, you can use her in a freeze team, but especially with her, she'll get a lot better. So keep that in mind. Charlotte can be really good for a freeze team as well. Moving on, you can use her in generic Dendro teams like Burgeon or Hyperbloom, technically called a fridge team with a cryo character, as with the cryo and Dendro auras applied simultaneously on an enemy, you'll get more blooms per hydro that you're applying on the enemies. Basically just a nice interaction between the two elements, allowing you to run Charlotte even on field in some of these teams if you don't have a character that can be used on field, and she can apply a bit more cryo and help you out while also healing you. She can be used in Burgeon or Hyperbloom depending on, what you want to run, with these characters being flexible, a hydro option, a Dendro option, and an electro hyperbloomer like Kuki, or a full EM right in Shogun. Also, I think that that Charlotte driving this fridge team, or hyper fridge in particular, where you're freezing and also hyper blooming, actually makes the team feel decent because you have an on-field auto attacker that can be difficult to get if you're otherwise just running a bunch of off-field supports. Apply some cryo while also constantly hyper blooming thanks to your off-field characters. Alternatively, you can also play Charlotte in a reverse melt team, although personally I don't really see the point of doing that outside of you just want to. You can use her on field, quick swap a little, and she can be fine here, but personally I would recommend a more offensive option like another cryo character like Rosaria or Shenhe. I also wanted to mention that in Risley teams, Charlotte can be a good cryo healer, as he's a character that can use the healing, especially when paired with Furina. Furina will drain your HP and Risley will drain his own as well, so having a nice strong healer, especially if your Risley is C0 like Charlotte, can be useful here. This allows you to run a flexible offensive last slot like an Anemo option like Kazuha to buff all of your cryo damage. Do keep in mind however that in a team like this you can also use other cryo characters like even Mika, who will give you some attack speed as well as burst healing, so it's not like Charlotte's the only option here, but a viable one that I wanted to mention in Risley teams as well. Because of this, I want to make it clear that you can use Charlotte in any cryo reaction team or any team where adding cryo doesn't really hurt you and just want a good amount of burst healing. Personally, with how many healers are out in the game, I can't recommend using her in a lot of those teams over someone like Diona, who will generate more energy unless you really need the healing, which is why I believe Charlotte to a certain extent is part of Furina's kit in a way. Really does give you that healing that Furina wants and can complement your Furina teams in many different ways. With that said, I know a lot of people might just like Charlotte and might not have Furina, which is why I want to make this guide inclusive and also emphasize the fact that you can use her as a healer in many of these other teams like Freeze or even Hyperbloom, where a cryo healer can be useful. While I'm not including a full showcase section, as I tried to put some footage throughout the video and she's a healer, I want to say that overall I am happy with Charlotte. She's not game breaking obviously, and there's a lot of times the different similar option or better option, but with Furina in particular, her burst healing is really nice. She can also be an on-field cryo if you need a driver, and just in general is a pretty cool character that I do like. As I said, her healing is surprisingly good as a 4-star and can help alleviate Furina's HP drain, which can be off-putting and something that you really need to play around. Charlotte can make it very easy, as all you need to do is press your burst and boom, you're healed. With that in mind, I hope you guys enjoyed this guide. If there's anything you want to add, it will be in a pinned comment, so stay tuned for that. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace. With that in mind, attack percent is a... Wait, where's attack?